Okay, so this video is for a class I have, which is Contemporary World. This is exercise number 10. The first instruction asks me to introduce myself as a student and mention that you are what we were. Okay, so the instruction literally says that you are going to talk about the Cold War. I guess it says, what are you going to talk about the Cold War? So my name, I don't want to say my name. Instead, I'm going to say my ID, which is 28 15809. Yes. So let's talk about the Cold War. As you can see, I'm wearing a Russian hat. This is actually a hat from the Cold War, you could say. I bought it in a old uniform military shop in Chile because Chile was a communist country during this period of time. So first than anything, I'm going to talk about economic, social and political systems, the period of bipolarity between these two, and general information about the economic, social and political situation in Europe after the Cold War. As well as I'm going to talk as well as I'm going to interview two other people about this subject. So let's move on. So, general description. Okay, this war started after World War II ended, and well, we know how World War II ended. The Iron Fist that finished the war was the Soviet Union or USSR, well, destroying the Nazis. But this left the country with two superpowers such as the United States of America and the Soviet Union. The problem is both had weapons of mass destruction. I mean, not mass destruction like to whip out a state. Like, if they wanted, they could, screw us all, destroy the whole planet. And that was, I mean, knowing that your neighbor has that kind of power creates this lack of trust. So, well, the Cold War started after World War II. It was called Cold War because both nations knew that they had this amount of power. So they knew that if they engaged in a hot war, for saying so, both would be destroyed along with all of us. So, okay. So main dates about this period of time of humankind. 1991, sorry, is the end of the Cold War. I'm starting with this because this period was tension between two superpowers mainly, or two ideas, capitalism and communism. You could see it like that, but I'm just going to use United States and the Soviet Union so it's more digestible for you. So 1991 was the year when the Soviet Union collapsed. I mean, they realized communism didn't work as well as they thought, and so I'm starting with it. Because I cannot really say when it started because it wasn't like, oh, World War II is ended, let's start another war. World War II was ended, and this lack of trust and fear mainly started, and so it took a little time for it to cook up and bring the Cold War problem. So, okay, another dates I want to include on this section of the exercise are like, not so much about battles and the war itself, but I mean, it was a pretty interesting war because it was a war of egos, and I don't mean egos the ones you can buy on the Walmart, like egos itself. Why do I say this? The main reason, and I think it's the obvious one, is because they had this run, for saying so, about getting into space, which strictly, or not strictly, but the popular media said that it was the United States, when actually Russia sent the first human being into space. The problem was they didn't know how to get him back. So many of Soviet astronauts died in orbit. Okay, moving on. 1947 is the year where the war started. I mean, many historians don't agree with this, but just for it to make it more digestible. If you see the video is shaking a lot, it's because I'm holding it with my hand, and Okay. Another important date. Sputnik. Sputnik was the first satellite on orbit, and Sputnik was created to study the enemy. As I said, the war was more threats than actions. So Sputnik is a Russian satellite, which was a spy satellite used to monitor and observe U.S. territory. The Sputnik was sent into orbit on 1947. Okay, moving on, just so it can be quick. Okay, what does the term Cold War refers to? We already said that. How does each economic system, capitalism and socialism, works? Be sure to include the names of people who began or proposed each one. So capitalism and communism are old. They are very old. They're older than World War One, but they became more popular during the Cold War because, as I mentioned before, the bipolarity between these two systems had a big factor during the Cold War. So capitalism is mainly about private ownership, which means you have something, and it's yours. I mean, not even the state could take it off from you. That's the idea of capitalism. The money you gain is according to on what you work and how many hours do you invest on the project or on your work. In the other hand, socialism is social ownership. You get the idea. It's the opposite to capitalism. You don't own anything. Everyone owns everything of everyone. That's mainly the idea of socialism. So socialism pops up when with the abuse of the labor sector, such as workers on factories or mass production works jobs. Sorry. So okay, it allows workers to self-manage themselves, and well, that's mainly it. The most important figure about socialism for me is Marx and Engels. Why is Marx and Engels? Because they actually started it not just as a theory, but they went to the workers and, hey, you're being exploited, no? I mean, your government is a bully to you. So that's why Marx and Engels are the main ones for me, but socialism started way back. But we are talking about Cold War, so let's stay with the people and the movements during Cold War, or not that much time before the war. And with capitalism was Adam Smith. I mean, he was a lawyer. He studied a little of philosophy. So I mean, it makes perfect sense for him to start his own idea about how the world should work and how not the world itself, but how should people be managed. Moving on. Let's go with the interviews, which is the last part of this. Oh my god, the video is already 10 minutes long. Sorry. So my first my first person I interviewed was my dad, who is not an historian, but is an historian from heart, because he has studied a lot of history. Sorry. So, what countries were in the world? What countries were the world war leaders during this period? During this period means World War, of course. Um, I mean Cold War. So, of course, he answered USSR and USA, as I mentioned before. Why did countries who were allies during the war became enemies afterwards? So the answer of my dad was a little extensive. So in order for the video to don't become any longer, I'm going to snap it a little. So his idea about why did this happen was mainly because of the ideas of how should the money, well, not the money, but how does the capital of the state should be managed. So capitalism and communism. So we have the A sector that said, hey, capitalism worked for me, and then we have the B sector that said, hey, communism worked for me. Law there the problem. Where did the Cold War take place? His answer was everywhere, from Latin America. As I mentioned, this hat is from Chile. From Latin America to all Europe and Asia. China was communist. And Japan, all of the sudden, who was very red during the war, World War II, became capitalist. Okay, no, it's fair. But they had this clash of ideas. What's the other question? What opinion did the general public have of the Cold War? His answer was that he thought they weren't content of ending a war and pretty much immediately starting another one. So that kind of sucked. Okay. What type of weapons did the World War powers have at their disposal? His answer was a little dark because we know how, I don't know how to say it in English, but in Spanish is gas mostaza, worked during World War One and even World War Two. And Cold War, you had a lot. I mean, you had the best, the work of the best scientists on the world at your disposal. And in World War Two, the atomic bomb was used, and the entire world knew the power of these weapons. So the power of the atom was the main weapon. And I don't mean only the atomic bomb, but radiation. Okay, and my second person I interviewed was Manuel Gonzalez. He's a colleague of mine in a volunteer work I have at a museum. So I mean, I just go there to clean stuff and tell some jokes, but he takes it pretty seriously, and therefore he knows a lot of history. So what currencies were the world leaders during this period? United States and the Soviet Union. Why did countries who were allies during this war become enemies afterwards? His answer was that due to the fact that they had been allies in the World War II, many of them didn't want to stay with that idea of being allies during this type of war. So it was like, hey, you and I work pretty well playing music, but we don't cook well together. So see ya. That's pretty much what he said to me. No. Where did the Cold War take place? His answer was Europe mainly. I disagree with him, but hey, okay. What opinion did the general public have of the war? He said that many of them were very proud of this war because mainly Russia. I mean, Russia did win the war against the Nazis, so many of Russian folk were very, I don't know, proud of their nation, and trying to reach out the stars was something very like wow. So That's his opinion. And what type of weapons did the two world war powers have at their disposal? And his answer was just nuclear weapons. Okay, my conclusion. My conclusion is that it's it's kind of impressive how humanity jumps from a war into another in a second of less than 100 years, which is sad. But wars also bring a lot of change, and they prove things, and they make generations to come better, so they can understand what happened, how did it happen, and how can we avoid it. Because honestly, no one wants to go to war. So I mean, for example, Fidel Castro, who for many was a dictator, was a brute, was um, someone horrible. But for Cuba, he was their savior. I mean, he literally went with 80 men in a jet called Grandma and free up his country. Yeah, he did. And Che Guevara didn't stop there. He started fighting for the rest of Latin America. And when whoever killed him, exposed the body of how he died to show the defeat of his movement. People only saw Jesus Christ. I mean, it's Latin America. What were they expecting? Okay, so my bibliography, I'm going to add it on the description of the video. This is going to be uploaded to YouTube. That's for you to know. As well as the screenshots. I'm not sure about how I'm going to do the screenshot thing. But hey, see ya.